The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, face down, and Lucius's hand came down on it so fast, he knocked over his coffee. I didn't say anything. I just watched the brown liquid spread across the granite, watched him grab a towel before he grabbed the phone, and something in my chest went quiet, in a way it hadn't in 31 years of marriage. "Wrong number," he said, wiping the counter without looking at me. "My name is Ardelia Summers. I've been married to Lucius since I was 23 years old, back when he still opened doors and called me ma'am like it meant something. We built a life in Houston, a house he refinanced twice, a son we raised right, a marriage I thought had already survived its hardest years. That morning started like any other. Coffee at 6, the local news murmuring in the background. Lucius in his robe, scrolling something on his phone with a half smile he didn't used to wear at 6 in the morning. "Who's that got you smiling so early?" I asked, light, the way you ask when you don't actually expect an answer to matter. "Nobody. Just news," he said, and slid the phone into his robe pocket before I could see the screen. I let it go. You let a lot of things go after 3 decades. A tone, a glance. A phone turned face down a beat too quickly. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself a lot of things that week. It was the following Tuesday when I heard him on the back porch, voice low, the kind of low men use when they don't want a voice carrying through an open window. I was rinsing dishes. I wasn't trying to hear anything. "You can't keep texting me during the day," he said. A pause. Then, softer than he'd spoken to me in years. I know, baby. I'll figure it out. Baby." I stood there with my hands and dishwater gone cold, and I told myself he was talking to our son. Dexter calls him that sometimes, joking. I told myself that lie all the way through drying the dishes, all the way through setting the table, all the way through dinner where Lucius asked me to pass the rolls, like it was any other Tuesday in any other year of our marriage. If you're watching this, drop in the comments what city you're tuning in from tonight. I always like to know who's sitting with me. It was Thursday when I found the receipt. Not snooping. Folding his laundry, same as I'd done every week of our marriage, when a slip of paper fell out of his jacket pocket onto the bedroom floor. A hotel. 20 minutes from our house. Dated the same Tuesday I'd heard him on that porch. I picked it up slow, like it might burn me, and I read it twice to make sure my eyes weren't playing tricks shaped by suspicion instead of truth. Room service charge. One name on the folio. Lucius Summers. I folded that receipt the way you fold something you intend to keep, not the way you fold something you intend to forgive. I slid it into the zippered pocket of my purse, the one where I kept things I didn't want found. Then I finished folding his shirts, hung them in his closet exactly the way he liked, and went downstairs to ask him what he wanted for dinner tomorrow. He smiled at me like a man who believed his wife still knew nothing. He had no idea I already knew where to look next. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Lucius and listened to him breathe like a man with nothing on his conscience, and I turned the receipt over and over in my mind until the numbers on it didn't even look like numbers anymore. A hotel 20 minutes away. A Tuesday. A voice on the porch saying baby like it had practice behind it. By morning, I had a name circling in my head I didn't want to let land. Dexter had mentioned it himself, 2 Sundays back, passing the green beans like it was nothing. Monique had a consulting trip. That same Tuesday, an overnight thing, nothing unusual for her work. I remembered it because I'd asked if she needed a ride to the airport. She'd said no, she had it handled. I sat with that a long time. A hotel 20 minutes from our house is not on the way to any airport. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry where he could see it. I made his eggs the way he liked them, runny in the middle, and watched him eat breakfast across from me like the floor under both of us hadn't just shifted. After he left for his Thursday golf game, I sat in my car in the driveway and called a number I'd kept in my phone for 3 years, ever since my cousin's divorce. A lawyer named Sylvia Greaves. Mrs. Summers. Sylvia's voice was calm, the kind of calm that comes from having heard worse than what you're about to say. "What can I help you with?" "I think my husband is having an affair," I said. My voice didn't shake. That surprised me more than the words did. "I don't want him to know I know. Not yet." "Smart," Sylvia said. "Most women call me after they've already shown their hand. Tell me what you have." I told her about the receipt, the porch, the trip that wasn't a trip. She didn't gasp, didn't soften her voice the way people do when they think you're fragile. She just asked me one question that settled something cold and clear in my chest. "Are your accounts joint?" "All of them," I said. "Good," she said. "Don't say a word to him, not one. Let him think he's still ahead of you." I drove home with that instruction sitting in my lap like a loaded thing. I told myself I could do it. Smile at my husband, fold his shirts, ask about his golf game, and never once let my face show what my hands already knew. Lucius came home a little after 4, sun-tired, his golf shirt damp at the collar. He kissed my cheek the way he always did, quick and absent, like checking a box. "Good round?" I asked. "Decent." He poured himself a glass of water and leaned against the counter, looking at me a beat too long like he was deciding something. "Ardelia, we need to talk. About us." My stomach dropped, but my face didn't move. "I've been thinking," he said, setting the glass down slow, "that maybe it's time we made things official. The separation. I already called somebody about the paperwork." I blinked at him, waiting for my own voice to come back to me. "You're already filing?" I asked. "I had Calvin draw something up Tuesday," he said, like it was nothing, like he hadn't just told me he'd been planning my ending before I'd even confirmed his betrayal. He thought he was 3 steps ahead of me. He didn't know I'd already taken the first one. 5 days. That's how long it took Lucius to file. 5 days from the night he told me over a glass of water that it was time we made things official, to the morning Sylvia called to confirm the papers had landed at her office. 5 days of him sleeping beside me like a man with a clean conscience, while I lay there counting every one of them. "He moved fast," Sylvia said. "That tells me something. Men who move fast are usually hiding something they're scared will surface if they wait." What do? Exactly what I told you. Nothing to him. Everything to me. That afternoon, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open to the joint account Lucius and I had shared since 1997. I'd paid bills from it 1,000 times. I'd never once read it like a woman building a case. The first thing that caught my eye was small. A $340 charge from a furniture warehouse I'd never set foot in, dated 3 weeks back. Then another, smaller, from a jewelry counter at the mall. I didn't remember receiving anything. I definitely didn't remember him giving me anything. I kept scrolling. A transfer, $2,500, routed out to an account I didn't recognize. Memo line, blank. Then another, smaller, same destination, 2 weeks later. My hands went cold before my mind caught up to why. I called Sylvia back before I even closed the laptop. "There's money leaving our account I can't account for," I said. "Different amounts, same outside account, no explanation." "That's exactly the kind of thing we need," she said. "Don't touch it. Don't ask him about it. Just keep watching. And Ardelia, pull whatever public records you can. Property, business filings, anything with his name on it. You're allowed to look. It's public information." I didn't know you could do that until she said it. I sat at that same table after she hung up and searched the county clerk's site with my husband's name in the box, like I was looking up a stranger. What came back stopped my breath. An LLC, filed 8 months ago. Lucius Summers listed as sole member. The business name meant nothing to me, Heritage Holdings Group, but the filing date did. 8 months ago was 3 weeks after my mother passed. 3 weeks after the life insurance payout landed in our joint account. The money I'd cried over before I'd even spent $1 of it. Money I'd told him plainly was for our future, not his. I sat back in my chair and read it again, certain I'd misunderstood. I hadn't. He'd taken my mother's money and built something with his name on it alone. I thought about the receipt in my purse, the hotel, the transfers with no memo line, and now this. An entire business I never knew existed, funded by money that was supposed to be ours, sitting under a name that wasn't. I closed the laptop slow, the way you close something you're not ready to look at twice in one day. Lucius came home an hour later, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I told him chicken. I didn't tell him I'd just found the first thread of the rope he was going to hang himself with. Calvin Stroud's letter arrived on a Wednesday, addressed to Sylvia, copied to me. Sylvia read it over the phone in a voice flat enough to hide whatever she actually thought of it. He's claiming Heritage Holdings is separate property, says it was created with his own separate funds, and was always intended to remain outside the marital estate. That money was my mother's, I said. He knows exactly where it came from. Then we prove it, Sylvia said. Intent isn't enough. Texas courts follow the money. If community funds are mixed into something he's calling separate property, or if separate property can't be clearly traced anymore, the court has to deal with that. What matters is where the money actually moved. So, if I can show community money went into it, then his argument gets a lot harder to make. That's the whole fight, Ardelia. Find the movement. I went back into the joint account that night after Lucius fell asleep, scrolling slower this time. The way you read something twice when the first read already broke your heart once. I found it on the third pass. A transfer. $4,000. Dated 9 days after Heritage Holdings was filed. Routed not to the unknown account I'd already flagged, but directly to something labeled HHG Operating. Then another 6 weeks later. Then a third, smaller transfer 2 months after that. Community money. Moving from our joint account into the business he was calling his alone. I sat with that for a long moment, feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't quite triumph yet, but wasn't grief anymore either. It was closer to clarity, the kind that comes when a fog you've been standing in finally thins enough to see the shape of the thing in front of you. I pulled up the dates side by side the way Sylvia taught me. Transfer dates in one column, nothing yet in the other. Almost without thinking, I opened my calendar app, the one where I still logged family things out of old habit. Dexter's birthday, doctor's appointments, Sunday dinners. 3 lines below my mother's anniversary sat a note I'd written months earlier. Monique, Dallas, consulting, back Thursday. I looked back at the bank records. The first transfer had gone through the day before. A coincidence, maybe. I kept scrolling. 6 weeks later, another calendar entry appeared. Monique, Austin, client trip. That one landed within a couple of days of the second transfer. I leaned back in my chair. 2 dates didn't prove anything. Not yet. But they were enough to make me stop dismissing the feeling that had been growing ever since I'd found that hotel receipt. The third transfer sat farther down the statement with nothing obvious beside it. No memory came to me. No calendar entry jumped off the screen. I highlighted the date anyway. If there was a connection, I wasn't going to invent one. I'd find it. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark kitchen a long while, the refrigerator humming the only sound in the house, my husband and my son both asleep upstairs, unaware that the woman in the kitchen below them was no longer just gathering evidence of a marriage falling apart. She was beginning to wonder whether two marriages had been unraveling at the same time. Dexter came by Sunday like he always did, the one tradition his father's mess hadn't managed to touch yet. I'd made smothered chicken, same as I had every Sunday since he was a boy, and he ate the way he always ate, fast and grateful, talking with his fork still in his hand. "Monique's been weird lately," he said, not looking up from his plate, the way men say something heavy while pretending it's light. "Working late, more than usual. Quiet about it too. Used to tell me everything about her cases. Now I get one-word answers." I kept my face still over my own plate. "Weird. How?" "I don't know." He shrugged. "Distracted. She took another trip last week. Didn't say much about it beforehand. Just packed and went." He paused, turning his fork over in his hand. "She changed the password on her phone a couple months back. Never bothered me before, but now she carries it everywhere, even into the laundry room." He gave a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "I sound ridiculous saying it out loud." "No," I said softly. "You sound worried." "I am." He rubbed the back of his neck. "We were supposed to go away for our anniversary next month. She canceled because of work, then forgot we'd even made the reservation. That's not like her." He looked down at his plate again. "Probably nothing. Work's just been a lot for her." I wanted to ask him which week. I wanted to ask him which city. I wanted to ask whether she'd canceled before or after Dallas. Instead, I sat there holding a secret heavier than anything I'd carried in 31 years of marriage. And I asked him to pass the rolls, instead of asking him anything that mattered. "You all right, Ma?" he asked, finally looking up. "You've been quiet." "Just tired," I said. "Your father's been a lot lately, too." He didn't push. Dexter never pushed, not since he was a boy. He'd wait for things to come to him rather than chase them, a patience I used to admire, and now needed more than ever from him. He left a little after 3, hugging me longer than usual at the door, like some part of him already sensed the ground shifting under all of us and didn't have the words for it yet. I closed the door and stood there a long moment, my hand still on the knob, thinking about the dates Sylvia and I had already mapped. Dallas, Austin, 2 transfers, 2 trips. I hadn't told Dexter any of it. I wasn't ready to watch his face break the way mine had over a hotel receipt. Sylvia called Monday morning before I'd even finished my coffee. "I'm sending the preservation letter today," she said. "Formal notice. It tells Lucius and his attorney that any further transfers, withdrawals, or movement of marital assets during this proceeding will be documented and, if necessary, brought before the court. It's standard. It also tends to make guilty men nervous." "Good," I said. Lucius read his copy that evening at the kitchen table, jaw tightening with every line. "This is excessive," he said, sliding the paper away from him like it had burned his fingers. "I haven't touched anything that isn't already mine." "Then you have nothing to worry about," I said, and watched something flicker behind his eyes that told me he understood, for the first time, that I wasn't simply absorbing whatever came next. He didn't have an answer for that. He just folded the letter along its original creases, the way a man folds something he intends to argue with later, and went upstairs without finishing his dinner. I sat alone at the table, turning his retreat over in my mind, when my phone buzzed with an email from Sylvia, the subject line short and sharp. Calvin responded, "We need to talk." Sylvia didn't waste time on hello. "Calvin sent his response to the preservation letter," she said, "and his counter on the asset split. Tell me." He's proposing 75% of the marital estate to Lucius, 25 to you. I sat down slowly, the phone pressed hard enough to my ear that I felt my own pulse in it. On what grounds? He's built the proposal around Heritage Holdings, Sylvia said. His position is that the LLC is Lucius's separate property and shouldn't be included in the community estate. From there, he's arguing that even within what's left, Lucius made the greater financial contribution during the marriage and should receive a disproportionate share. He's also pointing to the fact that he filed first, describing the divorce as an amicable, mutual decision, and suggesting you've already accepted the separation by continuing to cooperate. Her voice stayed even, professional, but I could hear something tightening underneath it, the sound of a woman insulted on someone else's behalf. He actually wrote that? I asked. He did. Calvin's betting that without clear tracing, Heritage Holdings stays outside the marital estate. If that happens, 75% doesn't look as outrageous on paper as it does in your kitchen. He's assuming we'll have very little to challenge. Amicable. The word came out of me flat, almost a laugh, except nothing about it was funny. He's been spending my mother's money for 8 months and having my daughter-in-law in hotel rooms 20 minutes from my house, and his lawyer wants to call this amicable. He doesn't know what we have yet, Sylvia said. That's the only reason he can make a proposal this aggressive. Right now, he's assuming the court will accept Heritage Holdings as separate property because he believes we can't trace the money. If that assumption falls apart, so does most of his argument. And if he finds out before we're ready, then we lose our advantage. Which is why nothing changes at home, Ardelia. Not your face, not your voice, not one single thing. Let him believe this number stands a chance. I hung up and sat at the kitchen table a long while, the house quiet around me. Lucius's golf clubs leaned against the hallway wall where he'd left them that morning, like a man with nothing weighing on him. 75%. He hadn't just decided to leave me. He'd decided what leaving me should cost me, and priced it like I'd contributed nothing to 31 years. He'd just as soon erase. He came home a little after 6, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek the way he always did, light and absent. Long day, he said, dropping into the chair across from me. You good? I'm fine, I said, and meant the words to land exactly the way they did. Calm, unbothered, a woman with nothing on her mind heavier than dinner. He studied me a beat too long, the way a man does when something doesn't add up, but he can't name what. Then he smiled, small and satisfied, as though he'd decided whatever Calvin had filed that morning had already settled the matter. You've always been reasonable, he said quietly. I'm hoping we can keep this simple. I'd like that too, I answered. The words seemed to relax him. Sylvia called, I added lightly, watching his face. Wants to set up a meeting. All of us, lawyers included. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not fear yet, just the first thin edge of it. When? Tomorrow, I said. 2 o'clock. He nodded slowly, reaching for his water glass, already composing whatever calm he intended to wear into that room. He had no idea the number his lawyer had just put on me was the very thing about to cost him everything he thought he'd already won. The conference room smelled like fresh coffee and old paper, and Calvin Stroud sat across from me with the kind of smile men wear when they think the outcome is already decided. He slid the document across the table himself, not waiting for Sylvia to hand it over. We've outlined a fair proposal, he said. 75% to Mr. Summers, 25% to Mrs. Summers, based on Heritage Holdings being separate property and the overall equities of the marital estate. I picked it up slowly, scanned the number printed in plain black type, and felt something settle in me that surprised even myself. Not rage, not grief. Something closer to amusement, the kind that comes when a man hands you the very rope he doesn't know you've already measured. I smiled. Lucius shifted beside Calvin, uncomfortable in a way he hadn't been a moment ago, like my smile didn't fit the script he'd rehearsed for this room. "Mr. Stroud," I said, setting the document down flat in front of me. "Can you walk me through what you're calling Mr. Summers's separate property? I'd like to understand the basis." Calvin's smile didn't move, but something behind his eyes recalculated. Heritage Holdings was established with Mr. Summers's separate funds and maintained with the intention of remaining separate. "Intention," I repeated, my voice almost pleasant. "And the tracing supporting that conclusion? Is that included anywhere in this proposal?" A pause, small, but real. "We'll provide whatever supporting documentation becomes necessary during discovery." Before I could answer, Sylvia quietly opened the folder she'd brought with her. She didn't slide anything across the table. She simply rested one bank statement near her legal pad and closed the folder again. She hadn't offered it as evidence. She hadn't needed to. Calvin's eyes dropped to it for less than a second. Then back to Sylvia. The confidence in his posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "I'd hate," I said, breaking the silence, "for either side to build a settlement proposal on assumptions that don't survive financial tracing." Nobody spoke for a moment. Lucius looked from Sylvia to Calvin, then back to me. For the first time since we'd walked into the room, he looked less certain than his own lawyer. Calvin cleared his throat. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "both sides should complete discovery before discussing final percentages." Sylvia spoke for the first time. "I think that's a sensible idea. Nothing more, nothing less." The room went quiet in a way that told me everyone understood something had shifted, even if nobody wanted to be the first to admit it. We wrapped 20 minutes later, no agreements signed. Calvin promising the supporting documentation he'd arrived expecting no one would question. Lucius left without looking at me, his hand hovering near my shoulder for half a second, like he meant to say something, then dropping back to his side instead. Sylvia pulled me aside in the hallway once they were gone, her voice low. "You rattled him good in there," she said, "both of them." "Was it enough?" She shook her head slowly, not unkindly. "It's a start. But a smile and good questions won't win this in front of a judge. We still need the commingling proof airtight. Every transfer, every date, every dollar traced clean." She closed the folder against her side. "Until then?" She glanced toward the conference room where Calvin was still talking quietly with Lucius. "Let them keep wondering what we already know." 75% was still on the table. For now. Sylvia's office had a whiteboard, and by Wednesday afternoon it had become a timeline of my own marriage laid out in dates and dollar signs. "Walk me through it again," she said, marker in hand. "From the top." The hotel receipt. First Tuesday, the one I found in his jacket. I watched her write it at the far left. Then the first transfer to Heritage Holdings, 9 days after the LLC filing. Then Monique's Dallas trip the following day. And the second transfer. 6 weeks later. Within a couple of days of her Austin trip, Sylvia drew a line connecting the dates and seeing it laid out that way. Black marker, straight line, no room left for doubt. Did something to me that finding the receipt itself hadn't. The receipt had felt like an accident I'd stumbled into. This felt like a pattern beginning to take shape. "You mentioned a third transfer," Sylvia said. "I did." "You never found anything connected to that date." I shook my head. "Not then. Let's look again." I pulled out my phone and opened the calendar I'd searched days earlier. This time, I slowed down. Doctor's appointments, Sunday dinners, Dexter's birthday. Then, farther down the month, I stopped. There it was, Monique, conference, San Antonio. I stared at it a long moment before checking the bank statement again. The conference had started the day before the third transfer. "I missed it," I said quietly. Sylvia walked over beside me. "You didn't miss it," she said. "You weren't looking for a pattern yet." She wrote San Antonio beside the third transfer on the board, then stepped back with her arms folded. "We're still not proving an affair with this," she said, "but we are showing a pattern of financial activity that deserves tracing. That's what matters." She opened another folder on her desk. "I subpoenaed part of Heritage Holdings' business records yesterday. We don't have everything yet, but we have enough to ask better questions." She slid one page toward me. 3 expense entries: 1 hotel, 1 upscale steakhouse, 1 luxury jewelry retailer, all listed as business expenses. None identifying who was there, all posted within days of the transfers we'd already traced. My eyes stopped on the jewelry charge. "It isn't proof," Sylvia said before I could speak. "Businesses entertain clients. They buy gifts. They travel. A single receipt doesn't tell us why. But 3 transfers, 3 trips, and these expenses. That's why we're tracing," she said. "If community money paid for travel, hotels, gifts, or anything unrelated to legitimate business, that strengthens the argument that marital assets were diverted for non-marital purposes. The affair isn't what wins your case. The money does." I looked back at the whiteboard. 3 transfers, 3 trips, business expenses that kept appearing in the same windows. Not proof by themselves, but no longer something I could dismiss as chance. I left Sylvia's office with a folder thick enough to need both hands. The whole ugly shape of it finally visible instead of scattered across months of small, deniable moments. I was barely through my own front door when my phone buzzed. "Dexter." "Ma, can I come by? Need to talk." He showed up 20 minutes later, and I knew before he said a word that something in him had cracked. He stood in my kitchen the way he used to stand there as a boy in trouble, shoulders pulled tight, not quite looking at me. "I found something," he said. "In Monique's car. Cleaning it out for her, like I always do." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, his hand not quite steady. "A receipt. Jewelry store. $800. "For what?" "That's the thing." His voice cracked on the next word. "I never bought her anything from that store. I don't even know where it is." He held it out to me like it might explain itself if I looked at it long enough. I took it from him slowly. The store name matched the retailer I'd seen minutes earlier in Heritage Holdings' expense records. The date matched the same week as the second transfer into Heritage Holdings. For the first time, one of the dates on Sylvia's whiteboard wasn't just pointing to a calendar. It was pointing to 2 receipts that had no business knowing each other existed. Dexter came back the next evening, and this time he didn't sit. He stood in my kitchen with his arms crossed tight against his chest, like a man trying to hold himself together with his own hands. "I asked her about the receipt," he said, "last night, soon as I got home." "What did she say?" "First, she said she didn't know what I was talking about. Then she said maybe it was a gift for her sister. She couldn't remember." He let out a breath that wasn't quite a laugh. "Ma, I've been married to that woman 6 years. She remembers everything. She remembers what shoes she wore to dinner 2 Christmases ago. She didn't remember an $800 receipt from a week ago?" I stayed quiet, let him keep going. This wasn't a moment to fill with my own words. So I pushed. Told her I knew it wasn't for her sister. The date didn't match up with anything, and that's when she got quiet. Real quiet. Then she said. He stopped, jaw working like the words physically hurt coming out. She said, "It doesn't matter where it came from, Dexter. It's done. Just let it be." "Let it be," I repeated. I told her that wasn't an answer. I told her if she didn't tell me the truth right then, I was done, pretending I hadn't noticed how strange she's been for months. His voice cracked. the first real break I'd heard from him since he was a teenager. She started crying. Not sorry crying. Caught crying. There's a difference, Ma. And I know it now. What did she say? She said it wasn't supposed to go this far. That it started as nothing, just somebody paying attention to her when she felt invisible in her own house. He shook his head slow, like trying to dislodge the words from where they'd landed. I asked her who. She wouldn't say a name. Just kept saying it was a mistake. It was over. She'd end it. But you don't believe her? I believe the receipt more than I believe her mouth right now. He finally looked at me, eyes red-rimmed but dry, like he'd already cried everything he had alone in his car before he ever knocked on my door. Ma, there's something else. When she was crying, she said something I don't think she meant to say out loud. My whole body went still. She said, "Your father knows how this feels too." The kitchen went so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum. "My father," he said again, slower, watching my face the way a man watches for a reaction he's afraid to find. Why would she bring up Dad in the middle of confessing to cheating on me? I felt the receipt in my purse, the hotel folio, the transfers, the dates lined up clean across Sylvia's whiteboard. Every piece I'd been carrying alone for weeks, suddenly pressing up hard against the moment my son stood in front of me, asking a question I already had the answer to. "Ma," he said, voice barely above a whisper now. "What do you know that I don't?" I pulled out a chair at my own kitchen table and told my son to sit down, because some truths shouldn't be received standing. "Your father is the one Monique's been seeing," I said. I watched it land on him in stages, the way bad news does when it's too large to absorb all at once. First confusion, his face searching mine like he must have misheard. Then the color leaving him, slow, from the jaw downward. Then something I hadn't seen on my son since he was 9 years old and learned his grandfather had died, a kind of grief that doesn't know yet where to put itself. "That's not..." He stopped, started again. "Ma, that's not possible. That's my father. I know." "How long have you known?" "Since I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket. Weeks now." I reached over and took his hand, the way I used to when he was small and scared of something in the dark. "I didn't tell you because I needed proof before I told anyone anything. I needed to be sure. And I needed Sylvia to build something your father couldn't talk his way out of." He pulled his hand back, not unkind, just needing the space to feel what he was feeling without anyone touching him through it. "You've been carrying this alone." I had to. While he sat across from me at Sunday dinner, while he asked me how married life was treating me. His voice rose, cracked, fell again. "Ma, he asked me that. 2 weeks ago. Looked me dead in the eye and asked me that." "I know." He sat with his head in his hands a long moment and I let him, because there was nothing I could say that would make the shape of that betrayal any smaller. When he finally looked up, something in his face had shifted, not healed, nothing close to healed, but settled into a different kind of resolve. "What do you need from me?" he asked. I told him about Heritage Holdings, the transfers, the dates lined up against Monique's trips. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "I have her old laptop," he said. "She left it at the house when she moved her things to her sister's last night. There might be something on it. Emails, messages, anything that puts his name next to hers in writing. Dexter, it's still half mine," he said, steady now, steadier than I'd seen him since he walked in the door. "I'm not breaking into anything that isn't already partly mine to look at." I gave Sylvia's number to him before he left, told him to call her in the morning, no later. I didn't sleep much that night. turning over the shape of what my son and I had just built together out of wreckage neither of us had asked for. I didn't know yet that across town, Lucius had already started moving the rest of Heritage Holdings funds the moment Calvin warned him the preservation letter meant exactly what it said. Sylvia called before 9, and I knew from the first word she said that something had moved. Lucius transferred $41,000 out of Heritage Holdings 3 days ago, she said. Routed it through his personal account, then into a newly opened business account under a different company name. He read the preservation letter, I said. He knew what it meant. He did, Sylvia said. From what Calvin told me this morning, he was advised not to move a dollar until discovery was underway. So why would he? A brief pause. Because he apparently convinced himself he wasn't hiding assets. He told Calvin he was reorganizing part of his business operations and keeping the money available, just under a different entity. He seems to think that's a legitimate distinction. And it isn't. It may be for ordinary business purposes, Sylvia said. Not when you're already under a preservation notice in a divorce. Once the court has ordered marital assets preserved, moving money like this, especially without agreement from the other side, creates a problem. Whether he meant to hide it or not, every transfer is now documented. There was something almost light in her voice, the controlled lightness of a woman watching confidence become evidence. Bank records, timestamps, wire confirmations, she continued. He didn't make the money disappear, Ardelia. He simply gave us another financial trail to follow. I thought of Dexter's words from days before. I believe the receipt more than I believe her mouth. I was starting to believe the timestamps more than I believed anything that came out of my husband's mouth at dinner each night, smiling at me like a man who still thought he held the upper hand. That evening, Lucius came home later than usual, his tie loosened, a stiffness in his shoulders that hadn't been there a week ago. He didn't kiss my cheek this time. He poured himself a drink instead, something he rarely did on a weeknight, and sat across from me without quite meeting my eyes. Long day? I asked, keeping my voice exactly as light as it had been, every night for weeks. Calvin's being overly cautious, he said, more to his glass than to me. Acts like every business decision has to stop because divorce papers got filed. Is that what the preservation letter says? He looked up at that, something sharp flickering across his face before he smoothed it back down. I didn't move anything out of reach, he said. I just reorganized where part of the business operates. Perfectly legal. I nodded slowly. I'm sure that's what you believe. He studied me for a moment, then relaxed slightly, mistaking my calm for agreement instead of patience. He didn't know that across town, Sylvia already had the wire confirmations printed and dated, sitting in a folder thick enough now to need a second one beside it. He finished his drink in silence, and I let him sit in whatever discomfort was eating at him, asking nothing, pushing nothing. Exactly the way Sylvia had coached me from the very first phone call. My phone buzzed against the counter just as he set his empty glass down. Sylvia? Calvin just called. Wants an emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning, his office. He sounded rattled. I looked up at Lucius, who was pouring himself a second drink now, still believing he'd found a clever way around the problem. He hadn't. The only difference now was that his confidence had done more damage than panic ever could. The hearing room wasn't the conference room we'd sat in before. This one had a judge's bench at the front, a court reporter typing quiet and steady, and a weight in the air that hadn't been there when it was just lawyers across a table. Sylvia laid it out clean, one document at a time, the way she'd promised she would from the very first phone call I made her. Your Honor, Heritage Holdings LLC was filed 8 months ago using funds that had first been deposited into the parties' joint account following Mrs. Summers's mother's life insurance payout. She slid the first exhibit forward. Mr. Summers later represented the company as his separate property despite repeated transfers of community funds, into its operating account. Calvin shifted in his seat beside Lucius. Your Honor, the LLC was created with Mr. Summers's personal intent to maintain separate ownership. The issue isn't intent, Sylvia replied, calm and measured. The issue is tracing. The financial records show community funds repeatedly deposited into the business after its creation. We also have evidence that additional funds were transferred after Mr. Summers received notice to preserve marital assets. The judge made another note. Calvin stood. Your Honor, we dispute the conclusion counsel is asking the court to draw. Community funds moving through a business account do not automatically convert an entire business into marital property, and these exhibits have not yet established that every expenditure challenged by opposing counsel was unrelated to legitimate business activity. Sylvia nodded once. I agree they do not automatically establish that, she said, which is why we're presenting tracing records instead of assumptions. The issue before the court is whether community funds were repeatedly deposited into, spent from, and later moved through an entity Mr. Summers represented as entirely separate. The records speak for themselves. Calvin tried again. Even assuming some commingling occurred, the amounts involved are relatively small compared to the company's total value. We also reserve the right to challenge portions of these financial summaries after reviewing the underlying records. They're significant because they demonstrate a continuing pattern, Sylvia said. She slid another exhibit forward. The records show transfers into Heritage Holdings, followed by expenditures during the same time periods that include hotel charges, travel expenses, and other purchases, for which no business documentation has yet been produced. One jewelry receipt recovered by Dexter Summers falls within that same financial window. We're not offering these records to prove misconduct in the marriage. We're offering them to demonstrate potential waste of community assets. The room went still. Your Honor, Calvin said, counsel is attempting to prejudice the court with allegations about an affair. No, Sylvia answered. The relationship itself isn't the issue before this court. The financial records are. They establish where community money went, how it was represented, and what happened after the preservation notice was served. Every exhibit comes from bank records, public filings, business records produced in discovery, or jointly owned financial documents. The judge studied the exhibits for a long moment, glasses resting low on her nose. Mr. Stroud, she said at last, does your client dispute the tracing of these transfers or the post-notice movement of funds? Calvin leaned toward Lucius, whispering quickly. Whatever Lucius said back, it wasn't the answer his lawyer wanted. After a long pause, Calvin stood again. At this time, Your Honor, we'd request additional time to review the financial tracing, verify the underlying accounting, and supplement our response. Granted. The judge closed the file. This court will reconvene in 3 weeks. At that time, the court will consider the evidence regarding commingling of community property, alleged waste of community assets, and any financial transfers occurring after notice was provided during these proceedings. 3 weeks. I sat very still, hands folded in my lap, while beside me, Lucius stared straight ahead, at nothing. For the first time since this all began, the conversation wasn't about his explanations. It was about his records. And records don't get nervous. The doorbell rang on a Tuesday evening, and I opened it to find Monique's mother standing on my porch, arms crossed against the cold, eyes red enough that I knew she hadn't come for tea. Patrice. I stepped back, holding the door. Come in. She didn't move right away, studying me like she was deciding whether I deserved the courtesy of stepping through my own front door. Monique told me everything last night. All of it. Her voice shook on the last word. I need to hear it from you. Not from my daughter, not from your husband. From you. I let her in, sat her down at the same kitchen table where I'd first told Dexter the truth, and I told her plainly, The receipt, the LLC, the transfers, the hotel folios with my husband's name printed clean across them. Patrice listened with her hands pressed flat against the table, like she needed something solid to hold on to. When I finished, she didn't cry. She just sat there a long moment, shaking her head slow. She called me crying about her marriage falling apart, Patrice said. Never once told me she was the reason it was falling apart. She looked up at me, something raw passing across her face. I'm sorry, Ardelia, for whatever that's worth from me. It's worth something, I said, and meant it. She left 20 minutes later, quieter than she'd arrived, the kind of quiet that comes from a woman recalculating everything she thought she knew about her own child. I'd barely closed the door behind her when I heard Lucius's car in the driveway. He came in looking smaller than I'd seen him look in 31 years, his shoulders pulled in, his usual ease nowhere in his posture. He stood in the kitchen doorway, not sitting, like he didn't trust himself to stay if he got too comfortable. Ardelia, he said, can we talk? Just us. No lawyers. Talk. I know what's coming in 3 weeks. I know what the judge is going to do with everything Sylvia put in front of her. His voice dropped lower, something almost pleading threading through it. I'm asking you one time to consider going easier on me. For what we built. For Dexter's sake, if not mine. I looked at him a long moment, this man I'd loved for 3 decades, who'd spent my mother's grief money on hotel rooms with our son's wife, and called it a business decision. You didn't think about Dexter when you let Monique into a hotel room 20 minutes from this house, I said. You didn't think about what we built when you filed first and tried to leave me with 25% of a life I helped you build every single day for 31 years. Ardelia? No. The word came out flat, final, with nothing left in it to negotiate. You don't get to call this hard for you now. Not after everything you made easy for yourself at my expense. He stood there a moment longer, mouth opening like he wanted to find something else to say, and finding nothing. He turned and walked out without another word, and I didn't watch him go. The courtroom was fuller than I expected for a divorce ruling. Just Sylvia, Calvin, Lucius, and me. But the air in it sat heavier than any room I'd stood in these past months. The judge didn't waste time on preamble. Having reviewed the evidence regarding the formation and funding of Heritage Holdings LLC, the tracing of community funds, the commingling established through the financial records, and the subsequent transfers made after notice to preserve marital assets. This court finds that a disproportionate division of the community estate is just and right under Texas law. I kept my hands folded in my lap, my breath even, the way Sylvia had coached me through every hearing leading to this one. The evidence further reflects that community funds were spent for non-marital purposes through Heritage Holdings. While this court is not assigning value based on the parties' personal relationship, it does consider the documented financial waste, concealment of assets, and unsupported claims of separate ownership when determining an equitable division. Calvin's shoulders lowered almost imperceptibly. He already knew where this was going. The court awards 65% of the marital estate, including Heritage Holdings LLC, to Mrs. Summers. Mr. Summers is awarded 35% of the remaining marital estate and shall remain solely responsible for any tax liabilities associated with the dissolution of the LLC. Calvin's pen stopped moving on his legal pad. Beside him, Lucius sat very still, staring at the bench like the words might rearrange themselves into something kinder if he waited long enough. They didn't. This court also notes, the judge continued, that Mr. Summers's request for a 75% allocation relied substantially on a separate property position that the evidence does not support. The financial tracing presented at hearing established otherwise. The ruling is final. Sylvia squeezed my hand once under the table. Quick, controlled. The only celebration either of us allowed ourselves inside that room. We walked out into the hallway separately, the way the whole process had taught us to. Calvin and Lucius a few steps behind. Voices low and clipped. I was almost to the courthouse doors when I heard Lucius call my name. Ardelia. Wait. I turned. Sylvia kept walking, giving us the space without a word. Lucius stood there beneath the fluorescent lights, looking older than he had in the conference room weeks ago, like the ruling had aged him on the spot. I just want to say something, not about the money. Then say it. He hesitated, jaw working. That morning, months back, before any of this started, the phone. You asked who had me smiling. My chest tightened, an old morning surfacing whole and unwelcome. I told you it was nobody. Just news. He held my eyes, something almost like relief settling over him now that there was nothing left to protect. It wasn't nobody. It was Monique. Neither of us spoke. I paid for those hotel rooms, he said quietly. The jewelry too. I closed my eyes for the briefest moment, not because I hadn't believed it, because I finally heard him stop pretending it wasn't true. Why tell me that now? I asked. After everything. Because the court took the money, he said. I don't want you spending the rest of your life wondering whether you imagine the rest. The words landed harder than I expected. Not because they gave me new pain, because they removed the last place doubt could hide. He turned and walked toward the elevators before I could find a response, leaving me standing alone in that hallway with a confession no bank statement could ever have recorded. The court had finished dividing our property. Lucius had finally divided himself from every lie he'd spent months trying to protect. And somehow, that truth weighed more than everything he'd just lost. The papers finalized on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the ruling, and I signed my name to the last of them at Sylvia's office with a steadiness that surprised even me. Heritage Holdings is yours now under the final settlement, Sylvia said, sliding the last document across for my signature. Your share of the estate has been transferred, everything's cleared, and the remaining paperwork has been recorded. And Lucius? Settled his 35%, accepted the judgment, and handled the tax liability tied to the LLC the way the court ordered. She closed the folder, something satisfied in the set of her shoulders. You did this, Ardelia. Every bit of it. I drove home that afternoon past the house I now owned outright, past the kind of quiet that no longer felt like grief, but like room to breathe. Dexter was waiting on my porch when I pulled in, 2 coffees in hand, the way he'd started doing most Thursdays since his own divorce from Monique became final a month earlier. How'd it feel? He asked, handing me a cup. Final, I said, sitting beside him on the steps. How's the new apartment? Smaller than the house, quieter too. He looked across the yard for a long moment. Monique reached out last week. Wanted to talk. Did you? No. He shook his head slowly. Some things don't need another conversation. They just need to stay finished. I nodded. So do some people. We sat together without saying anything else. The silence no longer heavy, only honest. That evening, going through an old box of photographs I hadn't opened in years, I found a card tucked between our wedding pictures. Lucius's handwriting. 28 years old. Written the year he made partner at his old firm while I was still working the front desk at a dental office to help cover our mortgage. To my wife, low-level job, never a low-level woman. I'll carry us both until you don't need carrying anymore. L. I'd kept that card because for a long time I'd believed every word of it. Somewhere along the years, the man who wrote it disappeared. The memory came back so clearly I could almost hear it again. One argument late at night after he'd made partner. Too much whiskey in his glass. Too much pride in his voice. You'll always be the low-level girl I married before I became somebody. I'd buried those words so deeply, I almost convinced myself they'd never been spoken. Now, holding that old card beside the memory of that night, I realized they had always belonged together. One showed me the man I married. The other showed me the man he chose to become. I set the card back into the box, not with anger this time, but with clarity. Lucius thought the affair would stay hidden. He thought the business would stay his. He thought the divorce would leave me with 25% of the life we'd built together. He was wrong about every one of those things. He called me low-level once, back when he believed success had lifted him above everyone who helped him get there. Now, he signs his name to 35%. I signed mine to the home we built, the business he tried to hide, and a future that no longer belonged to his lies. Because when everything was finally counted, the truth was worth far more than everything he tried to steal.